Welcome to Poets in the Conversation Room. We are so happy that you're here. We have a wonderful poet to present. I'm Grace Cavalieri, and my co-host is Kimberly Taylor, co-publisher of Annapolis Home Magazine and editor-in-chief of Annapolis Home Magazine, poet as well, of course. We want to thank St. John's for giving us a room in the house, a temple for the flame, and we will keep bringing America's top poets to Annapolis because of St. John's College. This series is honoring Nancy Buchenauer, who was a tutor at St. John's in Santa Fe, as well as here. And it is supported by the Maryland State Arts Council. So I wish to present Kimberly, who will then introduce our wonderful poet, Timothy.
Thank you, Grace, and so wonderful to see everybody. Thank you, Bruce. Good to see you today, too. I'm really excited to tell you guys about Timothy Donnelly. Seriously. Timothy Donnelly joins us from Columbia University today, from New York. He's the author of 4 books of poetry, a recipient of Columbia University's Distinguished Faculty and Faculty Mentoring Awards, the Poetry Society of America's Alice Faye de Castagnola Award, and the Paris Review's Bernard F. Connors Prize, as well as the highly prestigious Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. He's also received fellowships and done residencies with the Guggenheim Foundation, the Lannan Foundation, the New York State Writers Institute, and the beautiful historic T.S. Eliot Foundation. His poems have appeared in journals that include the American Poetry Review, Conjunction, Harper's, the Kenyon Review, The Nation, The New Republic, The New Yorker, Timothy, this is going on, the Paris Review, Poetry, and elsewhere, as well as in the Best American Poetry Anthology. And he's a recipient also of the Pushcart Prize. He was in the Pushcart Prize anthologies. And to me, Timothy Donnelly seems to plunge his finger straight into the heart of the earth and channel onto the page what wild impulses live there. Part oracle, part wizard, part philosopher, and a pure poet, Donnelly's work leaps from the page, articulating beautifully and musically the layers of the psyche through a lexicon of his own creation. And this includes a lightning syntax. Henry David Thoreau observed that most of us live lives of quiet desperation. Timothy's work, unlike any other poets today, has an extrasensory quality, as if he knows what we're thinking. He presents an intellectual abstraction, yet that it's also highly personal. When it comes down to, and is why I love Timothy's work, is he helps us face our desperation, and by writing about it so beautifully and insightfully, dispels this futility or this desperation that may haunt us until it becomes a dream. Welcome, Timothy Donnelly.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here, and thank you so much to Grace and Kimberly for hosting me, and thank you to St. John's. It's a beautiful campus, and it's a beautiful day, and I'm just going to jump right in. I'm going to read a few poems from my, this is my most recent book, Chariot, but I'm going to read a couple of poems from the book that I published just before this one. It's called The Problem of the Many, and I'll begin with the poem that Kimberly reminded me of last night, because she said, "Didn't you write one about a dog?" This is called Malamute, because I did. This is about being a dog. Malamute. When I was a dog, I pulled the sled with the other dogs, and to the crest of my ability, for never was I a snob about it, moreover, never lazy, day into night through the cold pine forest we were bred to, and for which I came to feel love as fast as others, as a blur that slowed around us at our suppers, then watched us twitch in our heavy sleep. When I was a dog, I pulled the sled with the other dogs, mile on mile convincingly, my tongue construed the forest, no condition not to drape in, identical its pinkness from my open mouth as theirs. The nylon tapes between us reinforcing sentiment, a kind relief through constant focus, but from what I failed to grasp, as did our language. When I was a dog, I pulled the sled with the other dogs who didn't know I didn't know, but that was what we were meant to be there for to begin with. Yet I could follow them who followed anyone behind us through the forest, where what seemed to know, but was a shape without sufficient contour, hovered, and it proved some trouble to me. When I was a dog, I pulled the sled with the other dogs, concealing my disquiet. Like a shoulder bone, the forebears said to hurry up now, bury. But everywhere the dirt rebuffed my larger purpose. A fortitude from all the earth had frozen up against me, the pause of whom had brought me nowhere but to shame, to let it drop for another mouth. When I was a dog, I pulled the sled with the other dogs, the way a roof collapses, inevitably, and even as the wind must always push, or it isn't wind, it's air, and I was air that had come to think of it, and some trouble to me the others felt no twitch of, or if they did, our language failed what must have been its purpose, or I won't soon be a dog again. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Grace mentioned my love of the color green yesterday when we were in conversation, and I thought I would read a poem that really explores the love of green as experienced in what used to be my favorite beverage, Diet Mountain Dew. This is called Diet Mountain Dew. I have built my ship of death, and when a wind kicks up, I'll cut it loose to do its thing across an unnamed lake of you, a firefly sent pulsing through the nonstop estivation of the verses of our South, who in its larval phase would feast on bitter worms and snails, who emerges from its mud chamber, our planet's most efficient luminescence, who turns chemical energy into radiant energy, shedding very little heat. So will I sail the compass of you, pleased with my cold light. I have built my ship of death, aglow in sturdy chemicals and powered up at night like American Express. I'm all customer service, only minus the customer. No service to speak of other than death. You will know my logo by its absence and slogan from the past ad for the sugared style of you on TV in my youth. It goes like this: when my thirst is at its worst, and then I let it trail off into the unsayable, or is it just unsaid, because my mouth is full of you again. A green like no other green in the dale, indelicate green, or green indecent, surpassing the fern and sprout in April's optimistic leaflet, some stop to admire in nature. They take photographs non-cognizant of other vehicles. You are too green for pasture. You are my green oncoming vehicle, usurper of green, assassin to the grasshopper and its plan. I put me in your path, which is the path a planet takes when it means to destroy another. I think you know I'm okay with that. A green like no other green, resplending in production since 1940, when brothers Barney and Allie Hartman cooked it up in Tennessee qua private mixer named after moonshine. Its formula then revised by Bill Bridgeforth of the Tri-City Beverage Corp. In 1958, year Linwood Burton, chemically inclined entrepreneur and ship cleaning service owner, sold his formula for a relatively safe maritime solvent to Procter & Gamble of Ohio, who went on to market it under the name of Mr. Clean, whose green approaches yours, then at the last second swerves into a joke yellow plays on green to make blue jealous till it blows up in its face, but I can't not love the smell of it. Citrus reimagined by an extraterrestrial lizard, which is to say inhuman in the way you say inhuman to me. A compliment unraveled in the drawl. Hey, you over there, you look so unaccustomed to temporality, I would have sworn you were inhuman. And time for it after time I fall. Further evidence of my humanity. I am at heart no less susceptible to rot than the felt hat on the head of the rifle-toting barefoot hillbilly, your mascot until he disappeared in 1969. Instinct says he must have shot his self in the woods in the mouth one sunrise when a frost was at hand and the apples fell thick, and he was way too awake when he did so, not to think there would be another waiting like a can of you and the 12-pack in my refrigerator. I have built my ship of death, and enough already. Every toxic sip of you preparing for the journey to bloviation. I leave to return and return to depart again the stronger, for a satisfaction being bound to no port has afforded me. I have built my ship of death so that even when I crawl back down into the hold of it, alive as what unnaturalness in you can keep me, it's only to emerge from the other end of it intact and perfectly prepared to be your grasshopper. Thank you. I'll read this one a little bit later. Oh, how? I meant to start the timer. I'm not, yes, it would seem early to stop right there, but but I don't want to go long. You'll say something if I start, if it's time for me to wrap things up. I'll read some poems from this new book, Chariot. I wrote all of the poems between March 2020 and August 2022. It came quickly, and it was during the brunt of the pandemic, and I spent a lot of time. There was a lot of time to fill. And this is part of what I filled it with. The first of the poems I wrote, that I'll read, is the first poem in the book, and it's called In My Life. And at the beginning of the pandemic, the gym that I was going to just in Brooklyn completely collapsed, and I had to find a new one. And the new one was some distance away, and I crossed the Gowanus Canal every day when going there. And the Gowanus Canal is like a super fun body of water. It's really polluted, and it's been polluted for centuries. And so there, oftentimes after a heavy rainstorm or something, like these sort of petroleum kind of chemicals rise to the surface and create these wild iridescent shapes. And it can't be denied that they're beautiful, but you know that they're also evidence of mismanagement of the planet. In my life, I have never seen the Milky Way the way it looks in pictures in my feed on Instagram, which is to say, like the trail of froth a sperm whale makes in videos when it swims up close to the air, but immeasurably more luminous and spattered everywhere in tiny barnacles of stars, whole portions of the sky stained improbably azure, purple, teal, a general sense of superimposition, but no real threat of being pounced on or made to suffer in captivity. The specter of symphonic music off in the background of the mind, relaxing with neurochemicals any suspicion vis-a-vis authenticity or preference to not be made a fool of, except by invitation, telling itself somewhere along the way it agreed to go along with everything so long as no one gets hurt. But I have seen its local counterpart in the residues of industry haunting the Gowanus Canal, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and polychlorinated biphenyls, coal tar wastes, and heavy metals dazzling the surface of the waterway in galactic shapes, in peacock, green, gold, sapphire, and while I have no desire to make pollution beautiful or to see it romantically, a voice says that's exactly what I'm doing, while another whispers down to me from a remove, saying, I am in my life like a dolphin trapped in a cove. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll read The Light. I'll read a couple of poems I read for you yesterday. This poem is called The Light. I did a lot of walking during lockdown, and mainly in an area of Brooklyn called Red Hook, which is where, which used to have the port. And so there's like a lot of old abandoned warehouses and whatnot, and not a lot of foot traffic, but it has a strong sense of history to it. The Light. Isn't it the work of those of us who work to make new tools with the tools we are given, hammering matter into matter, more adapted to the hands than to the memory of a hand, less to the past than to the path of what comes next? And isn't it the work of the next adaptation in part to evince specifically by being what it is, regardless of detail and whether it wants to or not, the matter of persistence through change, the hammering of being into time, which is itself the work? And so it was I took myself downriver, early in the midst of the worldwide sickness, the light on me knowledgeable as all light is knowledgeable, silent archive of everything that happens, it puts you in your place. The light put me in my place. Light on the surface of East River in March, light July through October, light at noon on slopes of undulations, purling for a moment till it gleams up on the peaks, the light like melon ribbon, light dribbling from the mouth of a mythical beast like Blake's dragon, but in effect, closer to a nebulous walrus made of fire. I am the nebulous walrus made of fire. I walk among you unrecognized, but laughing. There is so much beauty left to see in this world, and I became what I am now to see it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I'm going to read the poem that Kimberly designed that beautiful broadside of, and it is called Hush. I wrote this poem while staying at the T.S. Eliot House in Gloucester, Massachusetts. It was his family's summer home, and it's being maintained by the Eliot Foundation. And a number of other poets were staying there at the time as well. And one night we went swimming in this little beach that's just down the street from the house. And I had this experience of walking into what was a completely, black sea, and the sky itself was, there very little light pollution there. And so it was also black. And for a moment, it just felt like stepping into nothingness. A dream of mine. No, that doesn't sound nice. No, but sure, just to see what that would be like. No harm done. I'm having a hard time finding it in the book. I have it right here. Thank you for your offer. Hush. At night, the sea's surface is the penetrable onyx of deep sleep. I enter it without fear, as if to lower the input of the eye reduces risk, and whatever I can't presently see exists only in memory, which has been calmed by the water's cold hypnosis, and to be here is impersonal. Only the moonlight interrupts this near nothingness, the play of it on the glossy swell like a music you can feel, or like the mapping of something happening to me on another level, something that can be understood so long as it never finishes, and when it finishes, there is nothing left to understand. In the distance, other lights appear now on the far side of the harbor, and closer, the dull white gull-like hulls of a band of anchored boats rock softly, without intelligence. Later, elsewhere, I remember it vaguely, and it feels like the most meaningful way to go about it, as if the value of it grew by resisting precision, and that, coaxing particularity to glide from it, the sea retained a unity unlike anything other than the sky with which it had come to merge, but likewise it set itself outside the reach of grammar, whose designs on it were not kind, and yet what I mean by it isn't even the sea anymore, but an experience of the sea, which, syllable by syllable, I make the mistake of displacing. Thank you. I think I'm going to read another poem from The Problem of the Many, and this one's called All Through the War. And in it, I mention all of the nations that, at the time of the poem's composition, we were in conflict with, all through the war. I couldn't remember any of it any more than I could feel the corporate brotherhood at work among my breakfast flakes or in those protein shakes I drank to keep my strength up. I couldn't feel the toxicity the way I thought I should, little silver pinpricks in my liver and then all over my body, steadily proceeding to a brownout in my limbic system, then the not knowing when I was, if or where we were at war with and for what reason now. All the time I stopped eating meat again. I stopped eating sugar. I bought 4 watches, each watch stopped. I bought a pound of raw, rough, bulk lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and I couldn't stop my tongue from licking a certain piece of it like a dirty blue wedge of Toblerone to know how it would feel. As for time, I didn't always feel right with it, especially when alone, especially by the sea, where time widens to include more of itself, partly because of the motion and partly because of sound, which is also motion. A decade of drone strikes in the north couldn't stop Pakistani street vendors from salt roasting sweet corn in pans like steep-sided woks. My eyesight grew worrisome. I felt light tingling in my extremities, and left cheek I imagined meant diabetes, but it turned out to be nothing. I turned out to be fine. Last week, an airstrike in Somalia targeting an insurrectionist youth group killed a dozen or so. Yesterday, they seized a village in the center of the country. After my father's surgery, I went to Ireland on my own. I told the lighthouse keeper I was worried something was wrong with me because I couldn't stop looking at the water with all its changing shapes and color. She said, "We are all the same here, love, all the same." Often in quiet, I can still feel the stone's abrasion on my tongue. I pulled a lichen from the Bronze Age megalith with intent to burn it back home. I made Syrian red pepper and walnut dip flavored with cumin and pomegranate molasses. There is nothing more delicious when eating this. How many seeds did Persephone take? I thought I could cry for my friend no further until I opened her armoire to lay to rest her scented shirts in an appliance box. White, off-white, shell pink, true pink, lilac, lavender, blue. As polar seas warm up, the shrinking difference in air pressure between the poles and the equator weakens the jet stream and makes its path wobblier, explaining all this erratic weather we've been up to. The Senate voted against the resolution to stop support of the Saudi intervention in Yemen as Trump took lunch with the Saudi crown prince. I wake with scratches I can't explain. I order herbal supplements at night online and forget what for by the time they get here. It is funny. Ashwagandha skizranda. I read objects are more like events with longevity. On average, 130 Yemeni children died each day last year of extreme hunger and disease. A Saudi blockade on seaports stops the ships delivering aid. These are casualties of war. The instant the technician's needle found a vein, the seascape on the wall rattled uncontrollably. She whispered the clinic used to be a funeral home. Trump showed the prince posters of the assorted planes, tanks, ships, and munitions his oily billions might buy him, like an infomercial in the Oval Office. What use is an adaptogen when I worry my own daughter should soon prefer the hazards of an underworld to those of this and social media? I dropped a fossilized trilobite in the toilet, and it cracked in half. Millions of years of structural integrity finished just like that. Without Persephone, it all froze over. No crops grew. It was almost the end of us, but Zeus, her father, pulled strings to get her back. This service won't reactivate. I have come to love catachresis because what's wrong with it is right. I light my heart with so much emptiness. There's room in here in the dark for everything. War-related violence in Libya left 47 civilians dead this May, 38 men, 3 women, 4 boys, and 2 little girls to dust returneth. One version of the myth says Hecate leads Persephone to her mother with torches at the end of winter. Mother with torches at the end of winter. Some days I just sit back and watch things tear each other apart. It is winter on and off now through the end of spring. Emotion is everything and nothing. Same is true for structure. I said to my daughter on the phone, be an honest person. Just be an honest person. Be honest. I'm sorry about this. Be honest. Be honest. Some days I can't believe what it means to be alive some days. Some days I think about tearing myself apart, but not exactly with pleasure. Some days I know the strongest feeling is grief, but I believe it must be love. It has to be. Has to be. Has to. Some days I feel each cell in my body has its fingers crossed. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. It has been too long since I read that poem. I forgot how it makes me feel. Yeah, so I apologize for all the midday emotions here at the lectern. I will be superficial from here on out. No, I promise. I'm both, so let me see. Yeah, okay, I'm going to read. This one's cheerful. This one's called Habitable Nebula. The long night reminds me that so much of what it means to be a person shines through obscurity, like odd condiments bought on impulse, tested once, then pushed to the back of the refrigerator in their smartly labeled bottles and jars. It's like a birth of stars, or nights an actor plays their part so flawlessly the audience gives no thought to gastroenteritis or its various causes, viruses, bacteria, bacterial toxins, parasites, and so forth, till hours after the last act is dust. But setting aside all that small stuff, there's still the entirety of the past, invisible or visible only in traces, as among the blur that sets in during speeches, or when speeding to the launch past signage that tries to communicate, but by habit we ignore. I still can't say what life is for, but it can't be to pretend that every part of it is knowable, or that what appears to be to the naked eye or in the middle ground or documented on paper approximates a person any better than a daisy does our sun. When at a loss for what I am, I know I must be feeling it deep in the layers, where a turbulence gives rise to clouds so massive they collapse in a bliss of gravity, condensing into this music I can daisy into morning as it daisies me into morning. Thank you. I think I know who did that. I had the great fortune of spending a month at the James Merrill House in Stonington, Connecticut, during which I was able to write poems based on the objects that he had in his home, or as many of them as I could find time to write about. And I took a lot of notes and photographs too, so I'm going to keep on with this project. But this one I wrote quite early on in the month while I was there. And it is based on a carving I found in one of the rooms. And it's called Carving of a Lion Embracing a Man. When I hold it in my hands, I grow unsure if what I'm holding is made of ivory, but when I place it on the table, I feel confident that it can't be. Proximity in this instance raises doubts some distance lays to rest, contradicting what experience has so far insisted, namely, that the closer I get to a thing, the more knowledge I'll have to show for it. This same logic motivates my movements in the produce department and finds me leaning physically closer into a text whose meaning I find ambiguous. Questions pertaining to the object's medium likewise give way to those regarding what it represents, with the nature of the embrace hard to fix. What looks at first like combat softens into love as you approach, and the lion's wild eyes appear neither filled with terror nor meant to provoke it, but widened in relief, so strong it compels the animal to look up in wonder as the man's lips part, not in pain, but to whisper words of encouragement into the mane that shawls them both, saying all things weave into their opposite, and not just once, but endlessly, so that even when we interknit our similar hands together behind each other's back, we're never not on the verge of departure, its sorrow indistinguishable from the bliss of return. Thank you. And I think I'll just read one more, and it's a little bit longer, and then maybe I'll read the poem that we're going to talk about, if that sounds like a good plan. Yeah, okay. And this poem, they printed it out for me at the Westin Annapolis, and I'm saying that because I want to recommend their cream of crab soup. They'll take forever to get it to you, but it's worth it once it's there. A little salty, but sometimes that's kind of what you want. Yeah, I got it. This is called Fragment of Pottery Decorated with a Human Face. Evidence says seagrasses evolved from red and green algae into ferns and great conifers before something like nostalgia drew them back to the sea bottom via sugarcane, bamboos, and major grains like rices, Don't quote me here. This is loose, where looseness is at worst innocuous as a mushroom that only acts toxic, while at best it offers freedom from the quadrille of the strictly factual, letting language and idea off the leash a little in the interest of play, which we know to be fundamental to the development of skill sets necessary for the biocultural success of the individual. Yet, elsewhere, in milieu where attendees expect accuracy, if not exactitude, looseness greases the pole the osprey roosts on and pours a willful gravy over everything on the plate, masking hazmat and gristle. Too much of it one night, after earfuls of shambolic bombast and associates born ready to warp daylight in their favor. I was the lone attendee of my sad after-party, isolado of the walk-in wonder cabinet yards away, where a piece, and by piece I mean fragment, of pottery called to me, triangular, big as a slice of apple pie cut for a hungry uncle, but small as the rack in the tabletop pool table he'd give you for Christmas, heavy in the way old stoneware always is, its insides coarse and speckled gray, dense, cold, the gentle curve of its part suggesting the whole had been a jug. Loath to bring pie back up, but an ornamental relief resembling pie crust must have run along the vessel's width because a strip of it remains, damaged but incontestable, along the top of the inverted triangle, under which a rustic human face, in black and green on the left, green and black on the right, looks out, eyes widened at the viewer, not to give, but to be received, eyebrows angled like the accent in élève to check her students. She is prototype of Virginia Woolf in her fur-collared coat, cheek in hand, as in the photograph used in the U.S. ads for To the Lighthouse, whose Mrs. Ramsey feels herself hurled outward from the eddy of human activity and meaning-making in the middle of a dinner party, drifting off into the vague, echoic bourgeois sea inside her. It's a thing you have to fight privately, even if it almost always happens in the presence of others, although the meaning of presence has come to contradict itself, and the rhetorical choreography of power can drown you from a world away, like Prokofiev in a scherzo. And while what Mrs. Ramsey grieves is her role as conductor of the socio-affective lives of others and the toll it takes on her, mostly because her labor tends to go unnoticed, and although she'd never say this, the fruits of her own harvest don't belong to her. The queasy robotics these conditions induce and depend on, plus the chill of powerlessness felt in the face of their inoperability, given how enmeshed they are in basically everything, aren't too far from sweating it out in life's galley, while all my so-called shipmates fatten on the creme anglaise I can't even get myself to spit in. But if a potsherd can emphasize, this one can. She has outlasted tyrants' speeches, felt the bejesus they squeeze out from the organs of appetite that keep us running like a business. She has substance adequate to prop open doors for those who push past her and forget by the pop of their indifferent kava. She can give you notes on proceeding as a fraction of what you had once felt capable of being, and you can turn her over, the vegetal green of her face brightening on the flip side to the shade of it when low angular sunlight passes through nostalgic seagrass. I've seen a lot of it of late, floating fat on my back in the Atlantic all October, awaiting the sting of jellyfish and shark bites, eelily wigged out by the bounty of its weeds at first, then easing into it, sensing them want me there, a welcome to the ecosystem, their wavy blades along the length of me like lashes, and the pleasantly abrasive tongue of sand, a gangplank, into the ambiance that doesn't have to try, it just does. The ocean laughs at definition. It doesn't signify, hypothesize, hoodwink, or prevaricate. No stakeholder profits from my being in it yet. But like a house key in the thunderstorm of history, I feel it in the air tonight. Brute mechanic demands inflicted on many by a market economy necessitate reassurance that we're more than just numb functionary cogs or fungible appendages in the gross computational body of the ultra-rich. Keep you waiting here. What this looks like can get ugly. So you have to figure out how to organize your ugly, lest Uncle stub his cigar out on your frontal cortex and do it for you. It can't be play. when it drops like this, not when power powers its sick heaven on juice cold-pressed from modest paychecks. Make money while you sleep, they say, but mostly we lose sleep over money we can't make or keep long enough to feel any safer than a cartoon egg on a wall or primogenitor firtushed in the savannah diorama of living hand-to-mouth as herds of opulence or cottagecore reindeer phantasmagorically stamp their wattage-crazed images where uncle's spent cigar has left a scar that looks for all the world like a red corpuscle, a plate of pancakes, a wildfire via camera drone, and fading bands of ice around old mopey Saturn, first observed in 1610, but from the end of a wooden telescope in Padua that summer, Galileo thought they looked less like rings than a pair of ears. There's no right or left ear indicated on what's left of you, the left of what you were once anymore, but you're better off without it. This news cycle, like an uproar aboard a sinking ship, the hull of it torn open on the 9/10 of resentment our captain forgot to provide for in the maths. Now the workforce lies underwater, while the rich are safe indoors, and waterfront resorts I'm asked to in the idiom of credit offers I tear to pieces to spare myself the mistake of considering. I crawl the outskirts of comfort instead and smell everything on the dinner menu. I admire the vein blue bubbles of favor the rich inhabit like a clutch of backslapping gerbils. I endeavor to aspire. I spark up an umpteenth novena with the intention of a clearer vision of my place in time, and in its inwit, heaven takes me back to the sea. Here, I'll tell a story I never told anyone. I walked too far along the shore one day as a child and found a beach covered in 1,000 tiny fiddler crabs. They held their one weird claw to the sky like they were mad as hell at being made. When a wave came in, they would all skitter backwards into 1,000 holes in the sand, one hole per crab. When the wave receded, they would then maneuver their bodies back out of their holes and into the bright salt air. Next, they ran, a few at first, now dozens, hundreds, down in the direction of the sea, defiant, proud, like a battalion into battle. But when a new wave followed, they would skitter back into their holes. This went on for as long as I remember. Hole to shoreline, shoreline to hole, till I felt I could hear it, their movement, their seething made of time and its desperate little clicks. While the sea pushed on, its own sound a seething. And they said to be one or the other, but I wanted to be nothing. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. I'll read the poem that we'll talk about. Did we just segue like that? Okay. I think you have copies of a poem called "To Eat a Peach," and this is a cheerful poem. I'm pretty sure this is happy, although it is a bit deathy. After I thought I was finished with the book, I was approached by someone on behalf of the Shanghai Botanical Garden. They asked me if I would write a poem about a piece of fruit. And I thought, you know what, that's the kind of challenge I will accept. And so it just so happened to have, shortly thereafter, a really beautiful standout peach. It was towards the end of the season, and I was up in Rhode Island near an orchard near my parents' house there, and it was massive, like a softball-sized peach. And it was covered with more of that sort of fuzz that I was ever aware of possible for a peach. And you had to kind of like take care of it. But it felt like an entity. And this is my poem of gratitude for this peach and the way it improved my mood. To eat a peach. One day, I won't react when called by name or to the light slap on the cheek to break me from the sleep that isn't sleep. I will be still, and yet I won't. One night my living feet will graze the floor like ducks across a pond one final time and lift off into the dark of anyone's guess. Somewhere a word is waiting to be the last I speak. It might be I used it in passing today. It might be I'm using it now. We know this all too well. All things end. And each specifically as this peach, picked at an orchard days ago, skin shaggy as a lagomorph. You have to rub it off under cold running water before you'd ever dream of eating it. In all cases, there's a peach that's closer to where you are than all other peaches. Reach out and take it before what's next. Who's been ripening in a brown paper bag? We all have. Isolating, solving for X. I worry the divots mark places where the flesh has succumbed to catastrophe, but they surprise me every time, almost like sunset or like a wellness center I enter through my mouth, till I'm right in the middle of the last peach of a season thick with peaches, its juice ridiculous in rivers down my chin, liturgy of almond pushed through plush walls of mango, and in the heaven of it, I don't even know who I am. Oh, thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Very patient and very friendly audience, yeah.
We're going to have a moment, and we're going to have questions. I just want to say one thing, that you cannot see the page, but I have to describe it. In Charity, every page has five quatrains on a page. Every page is identically, architecturally perfect. And within that confine is this rich, bubbling, and tumultuous system of thinking. So if you wish to get a copy of Chariot, just sign your name at the end, and now we'll take your questions.
Okay. Thank you, Grace. Any questions? Do I maybe just talk about the composition? Yes.
So thank you.
Oh, sure.
Tell her who you are. Tell me who you are.
And I'm Meg Robinson.
Meg Robinson.
I'm Meg Robinson, and I am part of a group that studies with Grace, and we meet every 2 weeks, and we've been doing it for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
So, and we're all extremely lucky. And this is one of the other people in the group.
I'm Jan Booth.
Hi, Jan.
Yeah. So anyway, so we're very lucky to be a part of that group. And we get a prompt every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And all the prompts are different. Grace somehow manages to come up with these incredible prompts. And sometimes when I get a prompt, I get really upset and frustrated. I mean, not really upset, but I go, oh my God, how am I ever going to do this?
Yeah.
And I know that I wouldn't have written, as much poetry, and hopefully I've gotten better over time. But my question to you has to do with the sources of inspiration for your poems. And, for us, I don't think I could even come up with the different ideas for writing a poem. And if you can speak to that a little bit, how that process works for you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I have the fortune of, teaching poetry for a living, so I'm surrounded at all times by people who are doing it themselves, writing poems, and the idea of writing a poem is just it's the most natural thing you can imagine in that context. It's just as regular as like feeding cats or cleaning the refrigerator or whatever we do, laundry. That's always a positive, to be in a place where it sort of seems like the most reasonable thing to do is to write a poem, So that's helpful. But as far as finding inspiration, I find I'm also fortunate when I get to spend time on these residencies or when I'm on sabbatical or even during summers, because I can sort of clear my head and make room to be receptive to whatever idea comes my way. I find that when we're blocked or when we don't take inspiration from our, just being in the world, or even through our reading of other poems, but maybe even more importantly, just being in the world and responding to it, it's because we're stretched too thin, or we've got too many other things that are kind of getting in the way of our being receptive. Chances are, even before you came here, you saw something that made you stop and you took a look at it, and maybe something started to sprout, but you had to get here and you had to, be confronted with me. So that got in the way. But I would say for inspiration, just keep your eyes open and tell yourself that, that the little thing that seems to sort of be something you would dismiss or forget about, you can actually memorialize and think and ponder and meditate on. But then also to keep and I'm sure you do this, keep a little journal if someone says something or if you read something that sort of has a special kind of resonance to you, hold on to it. Maybe you won't realize what that resonance is or what what kind of special property that phrase has, but at some point I think that we can take those, if you're reading something, just a two-word phrase kind of means something to you, it leaps out. I sometimes think you can take that as a kind of magnet. And do you remember like taking magnets out into the sand and like pulling up all the sort of the ferric, all the iron bits? It's kind of like that. Take that phrase and rub it over your brain, or imagine you're doing that, and see what it draws up. I think if something stops us and asks us to pay attention to it, it's probably speaking to something deep down inside us, and we just have to sort of make space and time for that conversation to take place. You know what I mean? Yeah. But also, you have to push back all those things that tell us, like, this is foolish, there's no fruit in this, you know what I mean? Like, you're wasting your time, or who cares? Like, you got to get rid of all that noise. Yeah.
And speaking of noise,
Yeah.
you read your poetry so beautifully.
Oh,
When
thank
you're
you.
writing it, are you hearing it in your head, or does that process?
Yeah. I do hear it in my head, and I do read it over and over. It's sometimes not as, like, business casual as it might be when I read it. It's a little bit shabbier, a little bit quicker, do you know what I mean? But then when I know I'm going to read it, I have a slightly different setting, you know, and I like to make sure that the rhythm is more perceptible to people listening to it as I read it than I would imagine people might do on the page, because the sort of structural rhythm and the sound of the poem becomes something like an analog of seeing like what the poems look like on the page in terms of their structure. I like the combination of structure and abandon, you know what I mean? So I think when I read them that way, or when I read them aloud, I kind of enhance what might be thought of as their sonic structure. Yeah. No, I don't. Just read them over and over. I write mostly on the floor in my living room. I've always just written on the floor. No, not lying down, like on my stomach. No, like sitting, like like crisscross applesauce or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, and just like let the vibrations of the city make their way through my legs. Yeah, no, I feel like, yeah, maybe because it's not like work, so it's not like a desk job. It's like maybe that's it deep down. Yeah, and also it's more like play, and that's like I sit like a kid on the floor. Sorry, I keep on.
So following up on what Jan said, the poems on the page, as Grace was saying, have this architecture.
Yeah.
And hearing you read them today, I would not have expected them to sound that way from reading them on the page.
Yeah.
And you had, when you read, you have this sort of onrush of syllables that it's all in jam and no stop,
Yeah.
no breaks. Here we go.
Yeah, here we go.
Where on the page, it's there are definitely line breaks, and there's stanza breaks and stuff like that. And so, can you articulate why the spoken performance is different from the page, and why the page is different from the spoken
Yeah,
performance?
I sure can. I had better be able to account for that, right? The truth is that the poems, like all poems, I think, can withstand a close and contemplative kind of reading. Like, I'm not kidding. You know what I mean? So I feel like I want them to have that life on the page, that you can unpack stuff and come to discoveries and read it at your own kind of rate. But I know like a lot of all that is never going to transfer when I read the poem aloud. Like if I've got a reference here, or if this is meant to be understood ambiguously into, or those kinds of, maybe if I use a word and you see it recur, it's like happening in a certain kind of pattern. Like there's like stuff that you can appreciate only on the page that can't really get, I don't think, all that successfully conveyed when I'm reading them aloud. So I tell myself, find something else to do for the performance of the poem, turn it into its own kind of thing. So I do end up thinking that the poems have at least two existences. One is,
So it's like there's a fast reading and a slow reading.
yeah, something like that. Yeah, when you can change, you can sort of go back and read things a bit more intimate and public, or something like that. Yeah, no, so when it started early. Like, I know I've known Kimberly for a long time. I think when I first read, I just stood at the microphone and that's what came out. And I had to try to retrofit my understanding of why I read the way I do. But I think it is because probably my first inspiration when it comes to writing was going to Mass. And there's a certain kind of heavy rhythmic sound that is part of the parts of the Mass that were most effective to me. Like, you alone are the Holy One, you alone are the Lord, you alone are the Most High. So I was like, this is crazy. Like, this is language doing something different from Pass the Salt, or, Do you want to go to the grocery store? And so I like to lean into that a little bit, that sort of holy part of language.
But the pulsing beat is there when you're writing it on the page.
It
You're
is. I mean,
alone
I
in your-
feel it.
on your floor. As it were.
Oh yeah, and I make decisions based on that. Like I have to see how the phrasing will hold the rhythm that I really want. Sometimes the rhythm comes before the words, you know? Yeah, and you have to kind of catch up to your own music, yeah.
First a thought.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand your poetry when I read it. I couldn't understand your poetry when I read it slow. And so I'm so glad
Oh, wow.
to hear you recite it because it's smashing. I mean, it just, and it's neat. So I just wanted to make that observation. I understood it so much better.
That's great to
fast.
hear. Yeah.
And it's a kind of got a Gregorian chant to it.
Oh, sure. Well, I like
kind
all
of
that.
Rhythm.
Yeah.
But I also have a question.
Okay, great.
This poem speaks a lot about death,
Yes.
and but I can't connect it with all the juicy stuff.
With
too.
all, well, you know, what happened, sorry, is there more to the, okay.
That's all.
I knew that when I was given the task that I wanted the poem to be celebratory. Like I wasn't going to write a poem about how bad this banana is. You know, I kind of wanted a poem that was going to really celebrate I love fruit and vegetables, so in order for that to sort of seem like it mattered, that I thought that the peach was really that good, and that it sort of like became one of those, sometimes you'll eat something, like honestly, the soup that I had this morning, it was really good, this cream of crab soup. You know, like for a minute, sometimes you're eating something that tastes so delicious to you, it just, like, everything else around you is just like disappears for a little while. I mean, maybe I love food a little bit too much, but that's kind of how I felt about this peach. But I was like, I'm not gonna like just jump right in. It kind of became special because it was happening in the context of mortality. You know what I mean? And that when we hear like Wallace Stevens say, "Death is the mother of beauty," I'm like, you know what? I don't want to think that's true, but I think that the fact that everything does happen only for a time, including our own existences, is what makes them really, gives them contour and shape and makes it special. So I kind of wanted to be, I couldn't help but be, at the moment of writing about the peach, kind of aware of death.
Kudos.
Yeah, and also because it was the pandemic and that was everywhere, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. So yeah, I guess throughout your reading, I was able to pick up little fragments of other poems that I knew. I picked up D.H. Lawrence at one point with The
Yeah,
Shape of Death. And of course, To Eat a Peach, I thought of Proof Rock.
Yeah, that was accidental, but it's there.
I'm sure there was all those others that I missed, but I was wondering, there was also like a very acute attention to contemporary issues and to the contemporary world.
Yeah.
And I guess I was just wondering how you saw those two aspects of your work playing together, right? The tradition on the one hand and very much a poet in the contemporary world.
Yeah. Well, I'm impressed that you recognize the D.H. Lawrence. I was asked at some point, like, I don't want to give the impression that I'm like always being asked by other people to write poems, but it was the case that I was asked to participate in a Frank O'Hara tribute. This was around like one of the anniversaries, like maybe the 100th anniversary of his birth. I can't remember what it was. Might have been that. And there was a time when there were a number of Frank O'Hara events happening in the city. And this one was going to be on Fire Island, where he ended up dying from getting hit by a dune buggy. And there's a lot of poems by Frank O'Hara that I really like, and they're typically the darker ones, the heavier ones, not so, the ones that are sort of bright and cheerful, the lunch poems and stuff like that, although they're always laced with the kind of melancholy. They weren't really it for me, but he's got this poem called Joe's Jacket, which I absolutely love, and it's a big, heavy poem. And in it, he mentions reading The Ship of Death, the D.H. Lawrence poem. And so I kind of do quote a number of lines from that because I wanted to write a poem that I could read at this event. They wanted us to read poems. It's like, I'm going to write a poem that's sort of like, engaging with the poem by him that I like the best. And that led me to the D.H. Lawrence. And I wrote that poem like super quickly. It got pretty long, but it came like, I wrote it in a night. I wrote the night before the event. I had to read it at. And something about that sort of like the emergency, like you have to urgency, like kind of like propelled me. Yeah, maybe accountability. Maybe we should get like poetry accountability people. Like, did you write that poem you were talking about? So yeah, but how do I think about the thing? You know what? This is gonna seem like a really slippery answer, but if you just write from the fullness of everything that you're processing in the course of your consciousness, it's just gonna all get in there. I think you might be able to like make an argument about how this stuff is playing off, but for me, it's like, sometimes I wish like I had like the 8 crayon box, but I just keep on, it's like all of the colors are there and I feel like I'm gonna use them all. All the things that sort of turn my head or repulse me, I'm just gonna find a way to bring them into the poem. When you write a shorter poem, like the poems in Chariot, you don't really have as much space, and so I did want to read some of the longer poems because that's where I demonstrate that a little bit more. But if anything, maybe, now that I stop and think about it, I do feel it's not just, oh, this is what's on my mind. It's kind of like, I do feel a compulsion to combine those things. In part because I do really like history and I do really like older literature, and part of me thinks like another way to give that interest is to play it off stuff that's very contemporary. I tend to think everything gets its value through contrast or through things that it's sort of like next to, somewhat similar to, or quite different from. That's how we know a thing, is through, in part what it isn't. And so whenever I write, I'm always feeling like if I've gotten too cerebral, I need to dumb it down a little bit. If I've been too stupid, I need to say something sharp. If if things have been abstract for a while, let your brain leapfrog to a simile or something that's going to allow you to bring in something tangible and possibly from a different realm than the one you've been in. If I'm writing a poem about the darkness, at some point, that's too stark. If I'm writing a poem about going shopping at Lowe's, at some point, maybe I'm going to think about, the Ave Maria or White Lotus or something like that. Yes.
I just have an observation.
Okay.
Just something I really love is how you take something just very ordinary and even banal and give it such grandeur. Like in all cases, there's a peach that's closer to where you are than all other peaches. You make that seem, this ordinary thing, the peach, seems like such an important point. And then when you think about it, it really is, because it's how we position ourselves in the world, this body in relation to an object.
Yeah.
And it all becomes about this geography of, how we occupy the world.
Yeah.
And I just love that about your work.
Oh, thank
and
you.
I've observed that a number of places.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. And that, it was when reading Marjorie Perloff's recent book, I think this must have been her last, on Duchamp's Infantine. At one point, she mentions something about his observation regarding the heat that comes from a chair that someone has just sat in, and that this is something we all know as part, like a reality. Especially if you're in New York and you're getting on the subway. If you sit in a warm chair, you know what that means, but there's no word for that, and people don't generally talk about the ambient heat that's left behind after someone leaves a chair. But it's a real phenomenon, and so sometimes things that are central, but maybe this seems like minutia, I kind of like to spell them out. So like, of course, there's gonna always be a peach, even right now, that's closer to me than all other peaches. I don't know where that peach is. If someone has one on them, it might be but then I thought, well, that's like useless knowledge, but it's still I thought it was kind of like wonderful. Like, it's kind of like, where is that peach? Is it aware of me? Like, are we right now in some kind of secret conversation that neither of us really can understand? So I kind of wanted to give that. There's a poem I have in here that talks about, I want to get the phrasing just exactly right, and I'm sorry to be trailing off here, but I have a poem that talks about the invisible labor of useless thought. And I love pointless thought sometimes, because it's always worth considering what the human mind can come up with, and the little observations that we have about being in the world, like the idea of there being a peach right now that is closer to me than all other peaches. It's just a way of restoring, I think, at times, a sense of the marvelousness in the world, you know? And there's a critic, Viktor Shklovsky, he's a Russian formalist, and he wrote an essay that was published in 1917 called Art as Technique. And you've probably heard of some of his terms like ostranение, the making strange. And in the essay, he says that essentially art exists to make the stone stony again, to sort of look through all the layers of habituation and over-familiarization that we have in all the objects that sort of are around us, or even the events of the course of a life. And I like that idea a lot, that pushing back against the deadening forces of habit, and through exploring, you know, these weird little truths, like the nearness of a peach, you know. No one has a peach on them. I mean, I guess people don't go to poetry readings with peaches in their pockets. Yes?
Hi.
Hi.
The first poem I read of yours was Hymn to Life,
Oh, yeah.
and I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah.
I was actually, so shortly after it came out, I was in this group with that Stanley Plumley was leading,
Yeah.
and he said, I just don't know how he did it. He said, I just keep reading it to find out how he did it.
Really? Stanley Plumley said that?
Yes,
Oh,
he
I'm
did.
really flattered. Yeah.
So if you
Thank
could
you for
talk about
telling
it.
me that. That means a lot to me. I did it over the course. Okay, this is a long poem. It's 360 lines long, and in its flow, it kind of moves. I hit on a lot of species that have gone extinct. It's about, you know, really about extinction, but I call it Hymn to Life, again with me and my impulses. It took me about 3 months to finish. And I remember I finished it, and I was at a hotel in Tuscaloosa. I was visiting the college there, and I had a terrible flu. And I finished it, and I was like, I'm done. I finally got this one taken care of. Stamina, you know, and I think that's how I managed to do it. I like stamina. I think I get that from my father. I like a kind of challenge, and I like to push myself to do a thing that seems to be, if not undoable, at least difficult. I don't know how. Yeah, it took forever. And it finished in Tuscaloosa. But then I sent it to Poetry Magazine, and they published it they took it pretty quickly. This is back when poetry paid $10 a line. And I was like, I did the math real quick. So I got $3,600 for that poem, which was bananas. You know what I mean? I know, right? You know as well as I do, that does not happen. I didn't write it with that motive, but when I found out that that's what I'd be getting, I was like, yeah, that's the way to do it. I also should not be so silly. I was inspired by a poem by John Ashbery that does the same sort of like listing of all the different rivers. You know what I mean? And I kind of wanted a poem that had that sort of cataloging effect. Yeah, that poem was like. But I am so grateful to you for telling me that Stanley Plumley anecdote. Yeah. Yeah.
One last thing.
Sure.
The last line of this poem.
Yeah?
I love.
Oh, thank you.
I love, and in the heaven of it, I don't even know who I am.
Yeah.
You have a way of pulling our attention out of ourselves.
Yeah.
In part of the cadence of what you're doing. I'm amazed at myself saying, but yeah, it's so different and it's so energetic.
Yeah,
It's
thank you.
wonderful.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Wow.
Thank you.
I don't even know who I am.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love whatever people might like in that line. When I wrote it, I think that the idea of like an afterlife and what that might look like is still on some very basic level kind of like troubling me, you know? And sometimes think like if there is more, maybe it will come at the sacrifice of individual identity, and I kind of want to get used to that idea, even though I don't know what it looks like to, and so, but the idea that it might be blissful, because there are moments of forgetting that come as a great relief. So I know, and through meditation and certain kinds of practices that can get one to step outside oneself. I know it's a good thing. I just want to try to feel like goodbye identity, welcome everything. Yeah. She wants everything I say. She wants it to be the title of a poem or even a book. Yeah, I appreciate that though. Yeah.
I have a question. How do you find the courage?
How do I find the
How
courage?
do you find the courage day after day? And how do you give up fear? Or do you use fear? I mean, what you're doing takes enormous courage.
Oh, well, thank you, Grace. I think that what happens is like, for me, I have to just sort of. I don't think I ever start off a poem expecting to go to a place that was going to require courage or that will conjure up fear. I should know by this point that there's a decent chance it's going to happen. but when I sit down to write, it's kind of like I want to start an investigation as to what I might think and feel about something. You know what I mean? And oftentimes, especially if they do go lower, I find like the way that things build up, it usually has, at least for me, something of the weight of life history and experience. And I then feel like, oh, this is starting to seem so heavy. What consciousness and time on this planet can really squat on your chest and make it hard to breathe. But then I'm like, but I know I'm having a good time too. And so then I try to find ways to, kind of make that the maelstrom that I feel often sort of represented on the page in part as a way of controlling it. I don't want to say that exactly. You know what I mean? By having some measure of control and over the chaos, and having some sense of affirmation that comes from what strikes my ear as beauty. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I think everyone in the room who writes poems is probably contending with, you sit down and you find yourself contending with something and finding terms that are like coming to terms with it and feeling, at least in the moment of composition, some sense of victory over in the battle. Yes. Hi.
Thank you. I don't write poetry. I'm in business, and I am a scuba diver.
No.
Yes. And so, Hush so beautifully explained to me, expanded my mind about a night dive.
I bet. That must be wild.
Yes, they are. But the way that you've described all this, and then to go to eat a peach and have you describe the last word, just expands my mind so much.
That's nice of you to
And
say.
I'm so grateful to you.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Kimberly.
Timothy, when I read your poem about the dog for the first time,
Yeah.
it was actually in the New Yorker. And I remember thinking, wow, look at the New Yorker. They are publishing this wild poem about being a dog. And I just wondered, Grace mentioned the courage, and it's pretty graphic. And I mean, I know you had the one about the dolphin in the cove. I love that. And
you.
this seems to be even a more extreme captivity, being a dog yet again. In poem.
Yeah.
And
Do you know, this is so, I'll admit where the idea of that poem came from. This is really shameful. I was watching the video for Macklemore's Can't Hold Us. Does anybody remember this song? If we go back, this is the moment. There's sled dogs in it. And I swear, the sled dogs, all the other ones were kind of doing their sled doggy kind of thing, focusing on the distance. And then one kind of like looks at the camera, and I was like, I see you. Like, I know you're kind of like, you've got an extra level of like something else is going on in your mind. And so I was like, if I were a sled dog, I'd probably be like looking around, like, anyone else kind of think this is, but you know? And so I was like, I'm going to think about being the dog on the sled dog team who kind of has his head's going somewhere else. It's not really in the game of being, you know? I guess I don't know why I thought that would be a worthwhile endeavor. But honestly, all joking aside, a lot of poems in the book, The Problem of the Many, which is the term for a philosophical concept I won't get into, but when I saw that phrase, the problem of the many, that became a magnet for me. I'd be like, yeah, I'll say the problem of the many. Living in New York for as many years as I've lived, and that you know the problem of the many in another sense when you get on the subway. If it's not clear, I hate the subway. I really can't stand that. It is a huge part of my life. But I thought, it is that struggle simultaneously, like almost analogous to the one about identity, retaining it, sacrificing it, losing it, being relieved of it, and all that kind of stuff. And I thought about my role with other people. And there are times when I can just really feel completely social and completely, so very luckily locked into a number of different communities. And that can be it's what we're for. I know that we're meant for that. But there's always times, too, when I feel like I need solitude and I need to refresh and I need to I don't always feel like the other people that I'm in this community with. And so that little part that always wants to drift aside, wants to be alone a little bit, knows that there are limits to community, sometimes wants to have its say. And so in that poem, I think about, it's about me feeling like a community member who actually has their eye sometimes on the door. Yeah. But I think that's everybody, right? I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, the book overall does come down on the side of being with others. He's still a dog. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I had a question. Well, first of all, thanks for a wonderful reading.
Thank you.
And I was like really wrapped up with the syntax of the poems. And I was just wondering, I don't know, thoughts on the sentence or how you approach the sentence when you write.
Well, thank you for asking that. I love long sentences. I always have, or no, I don't think I liked them at the beginning of my journey as a reader, but I came to really love what they could do, how they could sort of encompass enormities in the space of one unit. I sometimes say things like you can start a sentence like in ancient Egypt and then end that sentence on the far side of the moon. I'm like, where else can you make that kind of a journey except through language? I guess through other visual media, but I do it with words. And I just like that sense of there being journeys, even if they're just imaginative, but these journeys that can happen in the space of a sentence. And that one is, when I say, ancient Egypt to the far side of the moon, that's kind of maybe in a silly way, it's very like geographic, but that can happen even in thoughts as far as like a thought about a peach that could somehow end, with scuba diving. Like, I just like showing how the mind has that elasticity to it and how it has the power to move in ways that maybe we can't quite move in our everyday lives. I became probably most excited by longer sentences when I was reading some classic Gothic fiction, and I mean like not, like Anne Radcliffe, Monk Lewis, Charles Maturin, this book called Melmoth the Wanderer. And in some of those sentences, they are extremely long. Like one of my favorite sentences in The Monk by Matthew Lewis begins, there's been a woman, or I think she was like a nun maybe, who ended up impregnated, and then they walled her up, and then when she gets discovered, she's given birth to the child, but the child is not alive. This is not a nice thing to be talking about, but her first sentence when she's rescued, she says something like, "Often have I at waking found my fingers ringed with the long worms which bred in the corrupted flesh of my infant." And I was like, that is So that's something, right? So I got really excited by writing these long sentences. And as you can tell, I tend to be a bit garrulous. I'm a bit wordy. And so the long sentences ended up accommodating or really more closely resembling what it's like when I sit down to think. Like things do come a little bit, maybe too fast, but the longer sentence is able to accommodate that or mirror that in some way. But at the same time, as I was saying about contrast, I also need to be sure to interrupt those flows with shorter sentences. And sometimes a poem, like the Peach poem, is built of relatively short sentences. Someone asked me not that long ago, or observed, it wasn't even presented as a question, that the first poem in Chariot is actually one sentence long. Which I did know that when I wrote it, and I've written other poems that were a single sentence. And I'll say one last thing. See, this is what happens. And the poem after is like 27 short sentences, and I hadn't realized that I had sort of done that. It seems like I did it deliberately. All one sentence, then the poem that has the most number of short sentences, like back to back. I must have known what I was doing on some level, but it wasn't conscious. And I think too, that a sentence that has a lot of subordinate clauses, that has, can sometimes demonstrate the complexity, I'll just say it, the complexity of life. The way that everything is kind of interdependent, everything kind of hangs on something else, and everything kind of has a relationship to something. So you can create these almost like textiles that seem to participate in the complexity of life, or mirror it, or try to contain it, or try to, so that's another thing that I like about it too. Yes? Pardon? Proof. Proust. Oh, turns out it's too much for me. Yes, I absolute admiration for that. But I've read the Overture to Swan's Way twice, but it's I can't do this. It has too much hold over me. It's like breathing fudge. It's I can't. It's just amazing. It's amazing, but I have to get a little bit older before I'm going to be able to sort of say, let's just do this. We don't have all day, so you better read your Proust now. But absolutely amazing sentences. I love Virginia Woolf too. I mentioned To the Lighthouse, that book, and some beautifully complex sentences there that think they can get the whole of it. You know what I mean? And I like that. I like a sentence that tries to grab it all. Yeah. I mean, it won't be able to, but it will. The effort, right? And to put yourself to the point of strain, but to still handle it with grace. I like that a lot. Yes.
Yeah, I guess I would like to ask about your sort of, just sort of in more detail, your writing process, especially when it comes to some of these longer poems, because I struggle to write long things.
Well, writing, sure. Thank you. Writing Hymn to Life was its own thing. That's a really, and that had a lot of research in it too. By research I mean Googling. And I kind of, I don't want to put on airs. But I also did want that poem to have, to feel like a sort of doom scroll, or to include lots, to in some ways be emulative of the flow of information that we sort of have to contend with in aspects of our daily lives. But I think that one of the reasons why, one of the things that sustains my longer poems is a kind of a movement to related things. The worst thing that can happen as a long poem is that it becomes static. Do you know what I mean? That it flags in its energy. And someone can say, oh, well, it's important for these things to flag because then when there's something more impactful or energetic, it's in contrast to that. And it's to create a lull so that the explosion seems more powerful, but I don't really know if that's for me. You know what I mean? At least maybe just in nano doses, but not in macro doses. So keeping the energy going is the biggest challenge in writing a longer poem. And for me, the way that I feel, at least to my own ear, capable of maintaining a longer poem is to make sure that I've got the rhythm where it needs to be. And you mentioned a couple of people have mentioned enjambment. I think enjambment and the energy that an enjambment can give to a line is so crucial to verse, rather than end stop, because that to me is you can make an interesting poem with end stops, but for me, like, I kind of need the propulsive energy that you get from enjambments or just line breaks. And I do tend to, a lot of my longer poems have like a property of like accretion to them, you know, and I feel like, and at that in some ways typically becomes thematized in the poem, at least to some degree. Like the pressure of having all of these sort of factors and things around us at any moment to consider, to value, to sort of, you know, there's the too muchness of existence that sometimes becomes a motivator and a kind of both I contend with it, but it also fuels the tank a little bit. So I'd move around. I'd make sure you got your rhythm where you want it. Make sure that that a line break, a well-executed line break, can give a zip of energy that's so specific. But sometimes if you have a line that doesn't have a piece of punctuation in it, make sure that in the middle, make sure that the one that's after it has like a medial punctuation, and then that part of the line there feels a little bit like a springboard. I figured this out reading, of all things, Alexander Pope. In the 18th century, close to a couplet, there was the thought of a hierarchy of pauses. And it made me pay a lot more attention to the interplay of lines that are without medial punctuation versus those that have them. You know what I mean? And it's a trick. It works. It works. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I didn't want to say anything else, but the last line of your poem,
Yeah.
I'm still fascinated
Go
with.
on.
And I read the
Very
whole thing
moves,
again
yeah.
and realized you have a line there. Walls of mango. Liturgy of almond plush walls of mango line. And in the heaven of it, you break into a different rhythm and
Yeah.
I don't even know who I am.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful.
Thank you. Yeah. See that?
just- wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the kind of line break that I'm talking about. Push through plush. Then plush seems like it's, well, this is what we can do with line break. Plush seems like it might be a noun there. It's like push through plush, like plushness or whatever. But then you realize it's an adjective modifying walls of mango. And I tried to come up with something that would be like a relatively economic description of the taste of, but I wanted it.
But you're winding up for a knockout.
Yeah, exactly. And in the heaven of it comes out the don't even know who I am. You read that exactly as I heard it. Yeah, exactly as I felt the cadences myself. Yeah. And so I feel like a lot of these, the structure of that, or the feeling of that, the cadence of it, the flow of it, the sort of the tone that you want to put on the lines, I feel like you feel it on some level. It just becomes a question of like, how do I mark that with words and with punctuation and with line breaks? And yeah, I think it came true at the end of that poem. Yeah, I appreciate your sensing that. Yeah. I like it too. Now, since we're in the state of crabs, there's sometimes that feeling of like when you pull the crab meat like out of the claw and it comes out perfect. Yeah. If you're lucky, well, of course. No, that's a special moment when you do that, and you want people to notice. Yeah. But sometimes you get that feeling when you're writing a poem and it's like you feel like, I think that's just exactly what I mean, and that's exactly how it feels. And that's a great, great moment when that happens. Yeah. Is there a word for that when you pull the meat out of the claw without breaking it? Lucky. Just lucky?
It takes a lot of skill.
Oh, I like that.
Around a lot of Maryland, it takes practice.
Yeah. Because lobster holds together a little bit better than crab does, Yeah, it does, right? And it's got a little different chew, and crab just kind of flakes when you put the pressure on it, so that's the risk that we're contending with. Yeah, delicious soup today. Yeah, I know. I will tell you, it's a little salty, but the flavors are all really good. Yeah. Here she comes. Oh, I don't know.
You heard it here, and you'll never forget it. This is a poet. This is a poet. And if you put your name down on that sign-in sheet, we will tell you when his books come in, and you will get them at a discounted rate. Also, give us your email so I can send you the link to see this again. I've sent it on globally today.